In this video, we'll have a look on how can you build a multi-tab Microsoft Teams personal application with SharePoint Framework. So really building that complex Microsoft Teams solution using SharePoint Framework as the UX layer. First of all, why would you actually do that? Well, the beauty of SharePoint Framework from a UX layer is that you don't have to worry about the hosting and deployment and all of that management. So you don't actually need to create a web application to Azure or somewhere else, which will then host your UX. We'd rather take advantage of SharePoint Framework, for example, with React or Angular, and then we implement our UX layer in the personal application or as a tab using the SharePoint Framework. And that's really the key benefit here. So you don't have to worry about hosting and deployment and operations because all of that is automatic and doesn't cost you anything. So you don't have to worry about hosting the application as such. Now, if you do use, for example, a bot, and then the bots are actually hosted in Azure. So from that perspective, if we include a bot on this complex solution, you still need to figure out an Azure setup, but not necessarily. Again, the personal application don't have to explicitly have a bot, even though that is recommended. Now, before we actually go on the actual steps on how to make this happen, let's have a look on what we mean with this terminology. So first of all, Microsoft Teams do support personal apps, and personal apps are those which are basically available from the 3 dots on the left menu. And if we have a look on the guidance related on the personal apps, they're slightly more complex than having a single tab in a channel, which is a relatively typical way of exposing, for example, SharePoint Framework web parts or applications in the Microsoft Teams side. So let's have a look on this one. So, okay, first of all, you get to personal apps from the 3 dots, and then you can select your personal application. And in the personal applications, there are certain guidelines and recommendations coming from Microsoft. So first of all, the personal app will have a tab. The tabs are basically the ones where a person goes to see a setting or see a functionality or settings or help file or additional views on the information, whatever the application is doing. So as an example, in this case, we're using the personal tasks as an example. So by default, you land on this personal task, but you can actually go to the recent task or all tasks to see individual tasks related on that particular application or the task application in this case. Now, if you scroll down on the guidance, we can absolutely see that the bot isn't required, but we can absolutely also have a bot there as let's say one of the landing tabs within a personal application. And obviously, if you are using a SharePoint framework, the bot is still a bot framework implementation, but we bundle that in as part of the personal application manifest. And I'll show all of this in practice when we walk through within the steps. And like I said, it is recommended to have help and potentially settings tab. So the settings tab is there because you might want to have configuration options for your personal app, which are not exposed by default. So when you're adding by default a Microsoft Teams tab to a channel, there is the configuration option, but with personal apps, that option doesn't exist. So you would expose those settings and configuration options in your solution, but it's whatever is dependent on your solution. Good. Now, how do we actually make this kind of a complex personal application using the SharePoint Framework? Now, by default, if we use the SharePoint Framework, we actually implement our solution using then React, Vue.js, or Angular, whatever is your chosen model. And then we package the solution, we put it in the SharePoint app catalog, we click Sync to Teams, and that will auto-generate the needed manifest for Microsoft Teams. The challenge of that one is that auto generation is quite, let's say, simple. It only takes one web part and exposes that either as a Microsoft Teams tab for a channel or a Microsoft Teams personal application. You can't really control how the personal application is being created, what are the settings and all of that. And therefore, you can actually also create manually the manifest, which we will then use to deploy the settings to the Microsoft Teams side. Now, let's actually walk through this process because in this case, we want to actually follow up on the guidance, the design guidance, and implement a complex personal application, which will have 3 different tabs, 3 different settings. We're not going to include a bot this time, but absolutely possible as well. But we'll have basically the application tab, we'll have the help tab, and we'll have the settings tabs. And how do we actually make this happen? Let's walk through that process. So first of all, what I've done already to save some time is that I created a solution where I have 3 different web parts. So I have our Condoso Metrics LOB. This is our imaginary LOB application, where I basically just have a web part here, which is saying this is the primary tab for the experiences. Just to explain, when we're landing on this one or watching this one in Microsoft Teams, you know that this is the primary tab. We also have a web part for the help exposure or the help tab, which is basically then having a different text, and then the settings tab. And in this case, I've intentionally kept the web parts themselves as simple as possible. So we're not going to concentrate on how to manage the settings. That is a separate video in future. Rather, how do we package this as a personal application with multiple tabs? Now, how would we do that? Well, the easiest way on creating anything in Microsoft Teams is really taking advantage of the tab designer, which is available in the Microsoft Teams. So let's have a look on that one. So let me go back on my tenant, and let me go back to my developer tenant, where I have one custom tab apparently visible here by default, but I want to actually open up my App Studio. And App Studio is really there to have a easy way of creating the manifest file. Obviously, you still need to implement the solution to be hosted in Azure or an SPFX solution or using the Teams, but the manifest, my App Studio is there to create, for example, the manifest for your solution. In my case, I have some examples here, but let's actually create a new one. So we start by creating the manually the manifest, and then we'll modify that based on the settings, whatever is needed. So first of all, let's give it a name. Let's call this Condoso LOB app. And let's give it a full name, Condoso. Well, we can actually use the same setting here. We need to have a unique ID, and let's actually generate that one. So that's fine. Let's call this Condoso Personal LOB app as the package name, the version being 1.01, doesn't really matter at this point, and we'll provide the description as well. And this is, I'm gonna just actually copy that one directly from there, and for the full description as well. Obviously, in the real world, you would actually want to explain what your solution is all about, because this information is exposed in the About tab of your solution. I will show that one in practice pretty soon, but let me put here full description without typos, hopefully, and short description in here as well. Now, then we want to actually include the developer information. In my case, I'm going to just use the Condoso as well, and then it's the DPS. It's the DPS Condoso is the company who's in the imaginary world creating now this application. If I would be a partner, we would actually add then the partner MPN ID in here, and in future you might actually get additional statistics around your solutions based on this ID. So it is actually really interesting and important to put that one in, even though it is an optional value. Now, then we have 2 different interesting URLs, which we need to be careful as well, or make sure that they are actually properly written. So we want to actually provide the privacy statement for the application, which we are building, the privacy statement for the application, which we are shipping, and matching that. And in here, we want to actually do the same for terms of use. And let's actually fix the typo there as well. Obviously, the condoso.com in this case doesn't exist, but in the real world, you would point to your solution-specific privacy statement and terms of usage in this case. And then we would be able to actually have an example branding and the images and all of that. And I'm not going to actually set none of these really. I'm going to just select a random color over there. Let's actually add that one. And we're basically good to go. So that's the basic setup around the solution. And we did this now manually because the auto generation with sync to Teams doesn't give you all of these benefits and doesn't give you all of the attributes which we want to use in this case. Now it actually gets then interesting. So how do we actually add that additional capabilities? How do we create the personal app using the SharePoint Framework web parts behind the scenes? What we want to do here is basically create the tabs, or sorry, the personal application tabs using the manifest. We're going to fix the URLs later, but let's call this LOB information. That would be the first tab where we will expose one of the web parts. Entity ID is, doesn't really matter. Content URL is doesn't actually matter either at this point. Because we're gonna fix it. But let's actually do here. almost like Contoso, contoso.com, and the website URL being contoso.com. So I'm just adding here an entry point, which I'm going to fix later on when I get the access on the entry. And I'm going to save that one. Must be valid with an HTTPS. Good point. Let's use HTTPS addresses in this case. There we go. Now that defines that we have one tab available for the personal apps. And let's add another one here. And this is going to be called help. And let's call this one 10,001. And let's actually do a content URL and a website URL as well. Again, it doesn't really matter at this point because we're going to fix all of this manually in a second. Well, not in a second because second is already done, but anyway, so pretty soon. Let's actually add one more 0 there just to be consistent with the numbering. And then we're going to add one more personal app for the third web part. We had the third web part waiting on the SharePoint Framework solution side, and that was settings, which would be then the configuration tab for your solution. So let's actually add there that one, and add their Contoso, and add their Contoso as well. Again, we're going to fix those URLs in a second. So now we have 3 tabs in our personal application. And obviously, if you would like to have a bot, if you would like to have any other settings, you would be doing that using the App Studio as well. Now, we could do domains and permissions using this UI, but I'm going to actually do that manually in a second. So for now, I'm going to actually put here just contoso.com. So we get the placeholder, for the valid domains, and then I'm going to actually update that based on the documentation which we have available in here. Cool. I think we're all done. We could add the app ID, we could add certain other settings, we could combine this with a bots like mention or connectors or message extensions, but in this case, we're going to concentrate on SharePoint Framework solution based the UX layer in the solution. Now we're ready to test and distribute. Well, not precisely. We want to actually download the solution. And let's actually download that one. And there is our solution. So let me actually take that solution, show in the folder. I'm going to take that solution. I'm going to copy that to the memory. And then I'm going to actually open up this folder for the editing. And the reason why I actually want to do this is that I want to copy that zip file, which was auto-generated, to my solution. So I can actually modify and contain the manifest, which is not automatically generated, manually generated manifest as part of my solution. And let's actually extract this one as well. So extract all, and that's going to be extracted to its own folder. And there we go. There's our assets and manifest, which we're going to use in this particular case. And we can access all of that information obviously using the Teams tab, Teams folder in the solution site in the Visual Studio Code as well. So we can see that one over there, and there's our manifest. And the information basically now matches whatever we actually set in the app designer in the Microsoft Teams site. But now we get to the interesting part. So we want to actually make sure that for the individual tabs, which are the static tabs, we can load the content dynamically from SharePoint, and the content would be the web part, which we actually have created as part of the solution, because that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that SharePoint, we can take advantage of SharePoint hosting the code, hosting the web part, hosting the React-based, non-React, the normal JavaScript-based implementation in this case, but it could be React or Angular or Vue, it doesn't really matter, automatically. And again, the hosting is the key part. This way, you don't have to worry about where the code is being hosted, how do you deploy that, all of that stuff. Everything is automatic and taken care of for you, except we need to update the URL. So let's actually do that. So let's go back on our documentation, and we go to our docs.microsoft.com. And in here, we go to the SharePoint development documentation, and we have web parts. And slightly there, we have creating Teams manifest manually. And the actual real article is create Microsoft Teams manifest manually for web part and deploy it to Microsoft Teams. And this is really around the fact that if the sync to Teams functionality isn't flexible enough, then we are able to manually create the manifest and really deploy more complex solution together with bots and together with other solutions to your tenants. And let's actually do that. Let's make this happen. So we are creating now personal tabs, and we created the personal tabs, 3 of them, and here's actually the content URL. So here's what we should be using as the automatic URL. And let's actually do that. Let's take that one, and let's actually open up. I'm gonna take that URL. There we go, the content URL, and I'm gonna go back in my manifest, and I'm going to actually update the whole content URL. Let's actually hide that one so we can actually see what did we get. Let's hide actually the tab as well. What did we get from the document? So we get basically here the Teams site domain / layouts 15 Teams login SPFX true destination Teams hosted app, which is really the key here. And here we are basically pointing to this ASPX file, which is automatically hosted by SharePoint, and then with the component ID of SPFX component ID. So now, by default, when we create an SPFX solution inside of the manifest which we generate, we are using these kind of tags. In this particular case, because we want to pinpoint to a specific component ID, and in this case, this is the LLP information, so the main web part or main tab, we need to go and check what is the individual ID of that particular web part. And let's actually do that. So let's go back on our files. Let me save that one. Let's go back in the files. Let's go, this is the controls metrics LOB. Let's go to it manifest. The manifest itself has a specific ID, and this is basically unique ID of that particular web part. So we can now instruct SharePoint to load this web part on that particular tab, because the URL is pointing to that ASPX file inside of the SharePoint. So let's actually do that. So let's go back in here. Let's actually update this section and getting rid of one of those parentheses and pasting in the GUID of that particular web part. And let's actually do the same for all of the other web parts as well. So we get actually everything working. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna copy this one. I'm gonna put that one on the help. There we go. And I'm gonna actually put that one over there as well. So now we're basically loading the same web part to all of those 3 different tabs, but that's not what we want. So let's go and actually get the right URLs, the right GUIDs. So the help web part and the help web part GUID is over here. So let's copy that one. And let's go back on the manifest. And let's go and update the GUID of that particular web part, which is hosted, which is loaded whenever that Teams host ASPX file is being loaded. And the same for the settings web part. So where is our manifest? Manifest over there. Let's actually get the ID, copy the ID. Let's go back on the manifest. Let's get in here and update that ID. So we're loading the right web part on the right settings. There we go. So now we're basically pretty close, ready to go, except for one more additional thing. So the valid domains is something what we need to double check. So let's go back on our documentation, where we actually define how do we create the manifest manually. Let's scroll all the way down here. We can see that the valid domains should be slightly more complex than that. To be honest, some of these domains are, how would I put it, eDoc used, so they're not actually relevant for production usage, but it's fine. We can actually copy all of those settings, move back in here, and paste in the list of the URLs as the valid domains for the solution. And that's it. We are pretty much ready to go. So now what we need to do is to think, how do we package the SharePoint Framework solution? So in this case, we have 3 web parts which are intended to be personal applications and personal as part of this personal app in the Microsoft Teams. So that means that maybe the setting or exposing that as a SharePoint web part doesn't make any sense. Now, using the supported host option, you could actually also have some additional settings like the personal Teams personal app or personal Teams tab, but we're not interested on the auto-generated option for the manifest. So therefore, what we actually want to do is get rid of the supported hosts completely. So this way, the web part and none of these web parts are being exposed as an option in the Microsoft Teams, or the Sync to Teams option is not visible in the app catalog either. So let's actually do that. Let's get rid of those settings, and we're all good. Everything is saved. Let's close the files, and let's actually open up the terminal so we can do some packaging. We are good to go from a solution perspective. And before we package our manifest file and deploy that to the teams, we want to make sure that we have the solution deployed to the SharePoint, because SharePoint, we're pointing the URLs to the SharePoint, and SharePoint needs to have access on those component IDs, which we created in here. So let's actually do that. So let's do gallop bundle, that's the ship. So we're basically making sure that the TypeScript is getting transcompiled to a JavaScript and it's ready to get packaged. Doesn't take too long. And then we do gallop package solution, that's the ship, which is then generating the SPPKG file, which is the one which contains all of the JavaScript files and assets and images and everything else. In this case, again, we didn't change any images. We're not actually even interested on the default images which we had generated for the team settings, because our Teams manifest and the setup is over there as an individual folder. But before we actually test that one out, let's go and install this solution to the SharePoint app catalog. So let me actually open up that one. And let's go to the app catalog. And that's actually, it's in apps. There we go. I just remember the URL, so I'm just jumping to the app catalog of this particular tenant. I'm going to apps to SharePoint, because SharePoint is going to be hosting automatically my solution. So let me actually open up again the folder structure. I have quite a lot of stuff apparently in here. If I go to the SharePoint folder solution, there's the SPPKG file, and now I can drag and drop that one in. It's going to ask me to approve the settings, to do all of that stuff. In this case, we want that to be actually deployed across the tenant automatically, so that the loading of the component IDs in the dynamic hosting is working without any problems. So let's actually click deploy. And there we go, upload completed. If we go back in here, if we refresh the page, somewhere in here, list of the pages, we should be able to see a new solution to be visible a few seconds ago. There we go, multi-tab personal app. And that is the one which is responsible of actually rendering then the UX layer in the Microsoft Teams. And now, since we got rid of the setting in the manifest file, if we go back in here, we can actually see that the sync to Teams option is not available. And that's because the web part is not set to be available in Microsoft Teams, because we created, again, the manifest manually. But now let's do the team side. So let's go back on the solution. And let's actually close the web parts. We're not interested in those. We have the folder in here, which is the one which we want to actually package. We updated the Teams host apps. We updated that it's a personal app with a component ID specific, and we're pretty much good to go. So that's the folder which we want to actually package. So let me go there and reveal in File Explorer. There's the folder. Let me get rid of the old zip file. Let me actually package that folder. Send to. Way too many options. Why am I not saying that? And here we go. So selecting send to compressed zip folder. That was awkward. Not to find that selection, and clearly getting old. There's the Contoso LOP app zip file, and that's basically now the solution file for Teams. And in the SharePoint solution file, it did actually contain the assets. So in the SharePoint SPPKG file, we can actually see that it contains all of the JavaScript files and outputs and all of the assets and rendering logic. But the Teams solution file, which is the zip file, only contains now what we had within that folder, which is basically the manifest and the images for this particular solution. And how do we get this one installed? Well, in our case, we have enabled site loading within this tenant. So let's go back in the team site. Let's go back in apps. Let's actually go back and build for M365 PnP, which we would actually see all of the options, which are the ones specific for this particular tenant. And in our case, well, didn't actually need me to go there, but anyway, I'm going to actually upload the file from the file system. And let me actually go back in here. So I will get the URL and let me paste that one in here. And not there. Let's go to the right folder and choose the LOB app. So let's have a look on, make sure that we're on the right location. So ePMP multimedia, yeah, that's the one, and Teams, and that's the one, and that's the zip file. So let me actually take that one. And the manifest parsing has been failed. Now, this means that I need to actually have a look on what is wrong within the parsing and what is wrong with the settings. And I'll be right back with a clarification what went wrong and what are the things which we copied it in the wrong way. This is actually really good because now we need to do some troubleshooting, which you might actually find as well. So the problem what we actually did here was pretty typical. I've done this so many times, so this is good learning for having the packaging to work. And some of you might have actually noticed what I'm doing here wrong. But the problem really was the fact that I'm actually having a folder within the zip file, and that's not how things actually should be done. So what I need to have is a zip file. Let's actually do that one more time and send compressed zip folder where the files are actually within the root of the zip file. So they're actually in the root zip file, not inside of a folder, inside of a zip file. So let's actually do that. Let me take that name from there and let's actually fix that one. And here we go. And there we go. Now, how did I actually solve that issue? That's actually probably quite interesting as well. So in here, when we uploaded the settings, we did have an exception, and the exception had something which said, do you want to copy the exception to your clipboard? And by doing that, I was actually able to get following a message. I'm going to actually paste it in here, which is error while extracting packets. Please ensure that there's no folders in your app package and that the app package contains only manifestation and the 2 required icons. So basically, there was the instructions how to fix it in the exception message, which is quite typical actually. It's a matter of always reading the exception message as well. So let me upload the file again. So where we are in the Teams, where that's the folder, there's the zip file, and let's see if we can actually get it in. And there we go. We can actually see the Contoso LOB app now available for Microsoft 365 BNB. And because this is a personal application, we can now actually see it available in here as well. So it takes a while actually to refresh, but we're able to basically select that directly from the build for Microsoft 365 BNB. And let me actually do that. So let's click that one. We can actually see that there's the full description, the short description, and the settings which were created in the manifest file. And that's the URL and the link which is pointing to the file. And that's the information which we provided as the name and all of that stuff. We could actually fix the image as well. And if I click Add, it's going to install that as a multi-tab personal application. And we can actually see that our web parts are being properly loaded. So this one is the primary tab for the experiences, my awesome personal app, and this is a main personal app solution experience. And like I said, intentionally, there was no actual functionality in here. I did change the rendering of the style slightly, and that is clearly causing the additional scroll bars, and that's a really easy thing to fix in the stylings. But the key point here is that now if I go to the Help tab, we can see a different web part getting loaded, which is Help for your solution. And then if we go to the settings, that's the third web part which is getting loaded, which is called settings, and that could be the configurations and settings for your solution. And like that, based on the guidance as well, we could actually have also here bots and everything else included in the solution, like in the documentation scenario what we have in here. And by the way, the obviously links to these articles are available in the video notes as well. But like I said, now we have a multi-tab personal app solution where the UX is being automatically hosted by SharePoint rather than demanding you to actually do the hosting and creating a website in Azure or some other location. So this way, it is much more cost efficient, and you can actually reuse the skills which you potentially have for SharePoint Framework for then in the Microsoft Teams development as well. If you're not familiar with SharePoint Framework actually supports React and Angular, Vue.js, whatever is your chosen platform, and it's a TypeScript-based implementation, like any modern development nowadays is for the web stack, based on the web stack model. So industry standard ways of extending the UX of SharePoint and also UX of Teams, and that's pretty convenient to have a one way of doing things from that perspective. Again, multiple different tabs in a single solution, and the About tab, if you're wondering, that is the one where we have then additional details and configurations and links to the privacy policy, terms of usage, and website, which we provided when we created the manifest in the manifest designer. But that's all. Pretty big, long video. We even ran into that small hiccup issue related on our solution, which is actually a really good one, because now we understand what was the issue related on packaging, because I accidentally left that additional folder inside of the zip file. Pretty typical thing, which probably you will run into sooner or later when you're implementing these things. But that's all what we're going to do in this video. So this one was really around how do we build a multi-tab Microsoft Teams personal apps with SharePoint frameworks. So really creating that complex Microsoft Teams solutions using the SharePoint frameworks as the UX layer. And we could absolutely include the bot framework together with these elements and the tabs, and then have a really complex and polished personal application available for Microsoft Teams. But thank you for watching, and please keep up the feedback coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.